Manager, and this is a kind of a thing that's kind of evolved over the years. So we're going to go through exactly what does a data manager do in clinical trials. Take a brief look then at paper versus electronic data capture. Have a look at some of the principles underlining data management for clinical trials. Have a look at the data cycle overall in clinical trials. And then a very important aspect is the data management plan, and that's going to be everyone's favourite document by the end of this presentation. So in terms of the role of data management, I suppose back in the day data managers would have been maybe considered to be more involved with data entry and data validation, and we would have had a picture of us on our desk consumed or overwhelmed by loads of paper, but that day has kind of changed and we're kind of more involved in the overall management of the data for the clinical trials. So I just wanted to put up things that we're involved with in general for the clinical trial process. So we're involved in study setup. And it's very important, and this is again something I'm going to be reiterating for this morning's session, but it's very important to try and involve a data manager and biostats very early on in the process, because we can streamline and make things more efficient and more accurate. So we would be involved in the development of the case report form, a very important piece of document that's going to collect the information that you need to answer your questions. We'd obviously be involved in building the database, or we'd be involved in user acceptance testing if you're going sending it out to a commercial company or whatever. And another important aspect for data managers nowadays, because of the advent of electronic data capture systems, are putting in kind of edit checks or validation checks that we can put in the systems, again to increase the accuracy at the data entry point. So throughout the study then, obviously we'd be involved in data entry applications. We may be involved in developing user guides, online kind of user guides and all that kind of stuff, just again to help data entry. Discrepancy management, any queries throughout the duration of the project we'd be involved with. Again, linking in with the quality system and quality managers to have a look at the data throughout the life cycle of the project itself. Any query reconciliation, data transfer, data extraction, any of that kind of stuff throughout the conduct of the study. So for study closeout then, again, making sure that all our queries are resolved, that we've got all our quality control things checked off, ready for database lock to send off to our statistician for analysis. Electronic archiving, again, very important aspect of data management now, and database transfer again, so you may need to upload your data to some other reserve. So we would be involved in that as well. So that's just a kind of a brief overview of what data management is nowadays. And I suppose I like to think of data management as a kind of a thread that runs throughout the whole life cycle of a clinical trial. So we're just going to look briefly at paper versus electronic data capture systems, and a lot of people would be very familiar with the old paper, fill it in, questionnaires, paper-based again, fill those in, very common in clinical practice and in research studies. They can lead to some problems in terms of the time it takes maybe to enter it into a spreadsheet. There may be prone to errors, there may be transcription problems. So because of all those things, I suppose data capture systems have been evolved over the years. And I suppose traditionally, if we just take a look at a paper-based system first, so we would have our case report forms, paper case report forms. Someone would be filling those in, so that would be a research nurse or whoever was involved in filling them in. Then someone else would be putting them into a database system, or it could be two people putting it into a database system. And then you have your poor data manager up there kind of trying to reconcile what the paper-based system and the database system, and making sure they're all okay. And again, all queries would have to go back to your investigator, and it's quite a long process if it's going to be paper-based. And then we have our poor project manager up in the corner there trying to make sense of everything that's happening down below. So as a result of that, I suppose some of the main kind of problems that may occur as a result of using paper-based studies would be the data availability. That's the major one. It takes time to get that paper-based stuff into a database so people can look at trends. It might take a bit of time to resolve any queries, and because of the kind of paper-based system, it might take a bit of time to get to the database lock and for analysis to occur. Quality, again, in electronic systems you can integrate kind of checks at the very start of the process, and that helps with the quality control. Again, patient eligibility mightn't be able to check that straight away, and again, the handwriting and transcription errors. The cost of paper-based studies, again, depending on the size of them, you may need two people for data input. There's the printing, there's distribution, your monitors need to travel to your site, And again, we have the problem of archiving mounds and mounds of paper. What do you do with it at the end of your trial? So with electronic data capture systems, and again in all the kind of clinical research facilities around, we're kind of using electronic based data capture systems, and a lot of them are kind of web based platforms. So everyone's logging on, we'll say, essentially to the same database, but everyone would have specific functions. So I'd log on, I'd be able to see some specific aspects of the data. The project manager would log on, have a look at their activities, and the investigator then would be able to have a read overview instead of a data entry overview. And of course our monitor, a lot of the monitoring that we do in the Cork-based facility would be central data monitoring. So electronic data capture system, I suppose some of the benefits again would be the data availability. It's real-time data availability, so you can check trends very quickly, you can resolve queries really quickly, and that ultimately then would lead to faster database lock. In terms of quality, again, as I was saying, I'm going to be reiterating this point again throughout this morning session, but you can put in quality checks, consistency checks, edit checks online to ensure data quality at the data entry point. You won't have any handwriting or transcription problems, and again, if there are any changes to protocol, that can be sent to all sites immediately so everyone's aware of any changes. Again, cost implication, you don't have someone involved in double data entry. Printing, again, distribution costs have reduced, and you may not need to have as many monitoring visits to your site if you're using central data monitoring, and again that's dependent on the type of trial it is. So with the advent of electronic data capture systems came the kind of advent of the evolution of the regulations and the guidelines around those systems, and we've heard a lot, and you're going to be hearing a lot more for the rest of the day about ICH GCP. And the first kind of, we'll say, guideline in and around the use of electronic system was this thing called 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. It's an FDA guideline, and it was one of the first ones that kind of really said, right, we're using these electronic systems. How can we make sure that the electronic systems are doing what they're supposed to be doing? What kind of validation things can we put in place? What do we mean by an electronic audit trail? What do we mean by an electronic signature? So that was one of the first kind of documents that kind of specified that. There have been evolutions of documents over the years, and they're continuing to evolve because, I suppose technology is changing fairly rapidly, and we're using different mechanisms for data entry and processing now, and the guidelines kind of have to try and keep up with that, the regulations. So the technology is a bit in front of the regulations, I think, at this point, but hopefully it'll catch up. So we're going to just have a look actually at the first two. We're not going to mention any of the other ones because they're kind of more into technical specifications and what you need for system validation. And again, your data manager or your IT manager will be very familiar with those. So we're going to have a look at the GCP, and again, you mentioned this morning quite a lot, and will be mentioned throughout the day, but there's about 13 core principles, and 2 of those basically apply for data. So we're going to have a look at those 2. So the first one basically is data protection, privacy and confidentiality of your patient information, and that will be covered this afternoon, so I'm not going to labour too much on data protection. So what I just wanted to focus on this morning was the recording, the handling and the storing of the data. So how can you ensure that's accurate, that you're able to interpret it and it's able to be verified. So that's what we're kind of concentrating on this morning's data management session. The other one I just wanted to mention, as I said, is the 21 CFR Part 11 compliance, and I get a lot of questions about this, but the basics of it basically are, it gives you an outline of how you should validate your system. It tells you basically what an electronic audit trail is. It tells you about the different checks that you can put in place and all the quality documents that you should have in place if you are using an electronic system. So that's a good one to kind of start looking at if you are looking at electronic regulations. Excuse me. Okay, so the next thing we need to look at then is the data sequence. So we take ages designing our protocol. We have a specific question we need to answer. So the next thing you need to do is design your case report form. So anyone that's kind of new to case report forms, basically all that is a record of the data to make sure that it's efficiently collected and that it's accurate. And you're trying to make your case report form as clean, as consistent and as accurate as you can get it, and that allows for better processing later on, better analysis later on, and better reporting. So the more time you spend developing your case report form, the better it'll be for yourself in the end. So there are a few key questions that you need to kind of ask yourself, and one of the first one is, what data do I need to collect, basically? So what do I need to answer my question? And so what fields do I need to collect to answer my study question? And I suppose just to keep in mind there that the more that you fields that you are collecting, the more chance there is of problems, the more chance there is of queries, and that may slow down the whole process. So keeping that clean, very consistent and precise is very important. Again, when is the data going to be collected? So are you going to be collecting certain fields at the baseline? Are they going to change for follow-up visits? So that needs to be fairly clean. What forms need to be designed? Again, it's very important, if you can at all, or if you're in a position at all, to maybe collaborate with whoever's going to be filling in the case report form. So if it's going to be a research nurse, can you get them involved in the designing of the case report form? After all, they're going to be the people that are filling it in, so the clearer it is for those, the better. Validated instruments, so are you going to be using a questionnaire? Are you going to be using a scale? Can you integrate those into your case report form? And again, how is the data going to be analysed? So having the chat early on with the biostatistician, or having the chat with the data manager early on, is very important. So you need to make sure you are obviously collecting the data that will answer the question. So one of the things that we use in data management to make sure that we are being accurate in our data collection is this thing called metadata design. And again, it would be kind of a core data management activity. And all metadata really is a kind of way of defining your variables, and if you can at all, put in validation rules along with those. So again, it helps with the data management process, it will help with the analysis, and it'll help the end user make sure that they are clear on what's being required to be collected. So hopefully it will reduce errors in the long run. So this is just an example of what a kind of metadata file would look like, and again, this would be done for every field in a case report form. So if we just take a look at the first one there down next to the red box, we say along that line of the red box. So we have a date of consent. We know that the type will be a date. We know what the format will be, so we'll have a specific format. And again, these things may seem very straightforward, but again, if you're using multinational sites, or if you're using a US site or whatever it may be, the date sequence might be different. And if at all, you can put in a validation rule. So can you put in a limit of time? So can the consent be before the enrollment date, or so on and so forth? So you can put in validation rules in and along all those fields, just again to make sure that the data is as accurate as it can be at the data entry process. And it's kind of a real-time data validation that technique that we use. So just to kind of reiterate some of the points, the main points for your database design: make sure you look at your protocol, obviously, and make sure you have enough fields to answer the question. Can you integrate any validated scales or questionnaires? Again, user friendliness is very important, so you don't want to be duplicating data if at all possible. You need to keep it clean. Nobody wants to be filling in multiple things multiple times. Again, does your database need to be receive certain information from other systems? Have you thought about querying tools, reporting tools? What way does your statistician want the reports to come out? And again, what analysis is going to be needed? So what format are you going to use your data in? So there's two kind of main database designs, and it's handy at all if you can at all integrate the two of them into the one system. So there's a study management aspect of it, so the data manager, your project manager, your monitors, they would be able to do certain reports, we'll say. And obviously then you have your clinical database, which is where you're going to input your clinical information. Again, other things to take into consideration, and your data manager can help with these as well, are the validation rules. So if you're using labs, can you put in specific ranges, and will it alert the person if something is outside a range? Can you put consistency date checks in place? So if there's certain a number of visits, are they all going to be consistent? Queries, again, reporting, and an important aspect again is the audit trail. So has your system a mechanism to make sure that it's logged when someone has logged in, entered data, if someone has changed data, the time and date of that, and what was the data before and what is the data after. So making sure your system has some type of an audit trail in place is important. So again, integrating your management system, integrating your electronic data capture system. Are you in a position to use handheld devices? So are you using iPads or anything at the patient bedside to collect information? Is that going to be able to work with your database system? Some people would be using interactive voice response systems. Is that going to be able to be integrated into your electronic data system? You may be using partner systems, so they may have other kind of databases that you need to integrate into central labs. So there's a few things you need to kind of think about on the offset when you're designing your database. And again, what do you want out of the end? So what way do you want your data? What do you want your reporting to be? And do you need any kind of management system to be integrated into that as well? So it's kind of difficult to see this one, but this is an FDA reviewer, and they were trying to figure out the answer to one question. They had to print out 36 pages, and they were from 5 different databases to try and figure out the answer to one question. And we certainly don't want that situation to be happening. So trying to ensure that you've thought about integrating different systems at the start is a fairly handy thing to do. So data standards is another thing that's kind of not really thought of on the offset, but data standards, I suppose, can increase the efficiency of clinical trials. They can streamline data collection. They can usually lead to higher quality data. They can be integrated very easily at the start in terms of the software development. Very important for long-term archiving, and for certain funding agencies they can be important for submissions. And all data standards are doing are kind of standardizing the format of your fields that you're collecting. So it will be a specific format of data or specific coding of data. So if you are doing a lot of regulatory stuff, you might be involved in metric coding, or if you're into medical history, you might think about using ICD-10 coding. So there's a lot of different coding or data dictionaries that can kind of help streamline the data entry process and make it more accurate. So there's a few things to consider, and again, data management that would be very involved in the selection of those. So for your data collection, again, we're kind of reiterating some of the points this morning, but you need to make sure your data collection tool is working. You've decided where you want to get your data, that you've got an audit process in place, that you've tested your system itself, so you've gone through pilot testing, you have all your SOPs in place, you have all your training in place, and you have what you want to do with your data collection in place as well. So again, reiterating it from a data management point of view, it's very important to test the site and make sure you have your end user testing your site. And then usually what we say, it takes about 1/3 of the time to develop a database, 1/3 of the time to test it, and another 1/3 of the time to retest it. So the testing does take a time, but it's well worth putting the effort in for the timing. Again, piloting, recording, and making sure you have some type of SOP in place to have a look at the flow of the data. Again, making sure you have an audit trail in place for any changes that you make to your system, making sure everything is traceable and that you've got procedures in place. Obviously, in and around electronic data capture systems, there is specific issues in and around security. So if you are using laptops, that you have them password protected, they're encrypted, and again, your IT or your data management can help you with that. Again, having some type of system or SOP in place to list all the people who have actually access to the system, what type of access do they have, and if they leave, is there a system in place to make sure you revoke their access? You can't delete their account, but you can revoke their access. So you've gone to the trouble of all of this, and you've taken the time to do up your protocol, do up your case report form, and it's very important that you think of the data entry process. You can't ever overestimate, lads, your reader's abilities in terms of, you have to think at the start, is there anything that can go wrong with this, or can this field be interpreted in any other way? So you need to take the time at the start. So there are ways of trying to ensure accuracy at the data entry point. So is there ways you can integrate information? So if you're using an ECG, can you integrate that directly into the system instead of manually entering certain fields? Optical recognition is another one. Can you limit the amount of free text and just have specific tick boxes? All of those things need to be taken into consideration. And again, having SOPs clearly defined, what's required for data entry is very important. Can you develop user guidelines? Can you develop data dictionaries? And literally a data dictionary would be explaining, what you mean by time in terms of 24 hours, or that the date is in a certain way. Can you record an online data entry? So we would use that in clinical research for this facility in Cork. So you would have someone just doing what is involved in the data entry process and take the person through a patient, and that's very handy again for training if people leave or if new people start, having those things in place. Again, having regular backups, so make sure if you think your stuff is being backed up that it is actually being backed up, and archiving, again, a very important aspect, and your data management team or your IT department again will help with those. So there's a lot of bits and pieces involved in data management, and we have to kind of piece it all together, and everyone's best friend from this meeting will be the data management plan. So we need to have, or at least start thinking about these data management plans and the importance of them. So they really do kind of make informed decisions, they anticipate and they start avoiding problems. If you can do these very early on, it's very important. Again, it avoids duplication. Nobody wants to be entering data several times. It'll help you avoid data loss and ensure that you don't have any security breaches. Again, if you can develop these things and implement these things early on in the process, it'll give rise to consistency and accurate data. And again, the main thing really is to ensure accurate, complete, reliable and secure data. So some of you have been involved in Horizon 2020 applications. Some of the pathways piloted data management plans, and they asked for specific things. So they asked about what your data will generate, what your project will generate in terms of data. How will you exploit it? How is it accessed? How is it verified, reused, curation, long-term preservation? And if some of you have been involved in funding in the UK, so most of the UK funders now require data management plans as a mandatory component of the funding application. So data management is certainly something that you're going to be becoming more familiar with if you haven't started being familiar with it already. It's asked a lot in ethical applications and grant applications here as well. So it's for your benefit, and trying to think of it early on if you possibly can. So the data management plan really consists of kind of five basic themes. It's the description of the data. So again, your data manager will help you with this content, the type, the format. Are you using any standards, any dictionaries? How are you going to collect it? How are you going to store it? Are there any ethical or regulatory kind of implications? The plans for the sharing and the access, and the strategy again for long-term preservation. So data management is, I think, an important component of the overall clinical trial process. So that was kind of just a brief overview of what's involved in data management, but please try and consider data management very early on in the process, and have the just sit down and have the chat with the data manager or a biostats person just to get the ball rolling. So I'd just like to thank you for your attention, and if there's any questions.
Another great presentation. Are there any questions from the audience?
Actually, I just have a question about audit trails.
Yeah.
Obviously, in an electronic system, they're inbuilt into it. But on a paper CRF, should you have somewhere to say who completed it and the date?
Yeah.
Like, would that be a finding if
Yeah.
it wasn't there?
Yeah. So you would have to do that, or if there was any changes made to a paper case report form, that you have kind of document system in place that you know someone has maybe crossed it or put a line through it, signed dated. So that would be an important aspect, all right.
And actually,
Sorry.
just another question.
Yeah.
For electronic databases,
Yeah.
how much faster would you get the final database off versus a paper?
It depends on the size of the trial and the complexity of the trial, to be honest, but a lot of the time the problems occur with the data entry in terms of quality and inconsistencies and that. So I suppose one of the benefits of the electronic system is that you can put a real-time edit checks in place, so you're stopping the person making the mistake in the first place, and that certainly speeds things up. And we've noticed that there's been a decrease in the amount of queries that we have from sites because of those things that we do have in place. But again, putting the time in to think of all those things or think of all those possibilities is very important. We haven't had any, people haven't been irritated by things popping up and stopping them or anything like that. So it's certainly improved it for us, definitely, yeah. It's made it much faster.
Question, Mike?
Yeah.
I was wondering, what system are you using for electronic CRF?
It depends again on the type of trial we have. In the clinical research facilities, we use macro. We have commercial companies that would develop them for our FP7 or Horizon 2020 type grants. So they would be, again, study specific, web-based portals, and there are other open source type systems available, but again, you'd have to check what their compliance is like, and you might need the backup of your IT department to implement those. So again, it depends really on the trial, but you would have a certain standard, so they would all be the 21 CFR Part 11 compliant, or they might be ISO certified, or it depends on the trial.
And out of interest, at the current state, would you have most of your CRFs electronic?
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
Yeah, they would be in Cork. Yeah.
Let's take one more question before break.
Yeah.
Actually, in the interest of time, maybe we could take other questions during the break, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Do you require your databases or anyone to be ISO standard compliant?
There's no specific guidelines for that at the moment. We kind of aim towards that, but a lot of the companies a lot of Irish companies may not be up to ISO spec at the moment. So a lot of the companies that we would use would be more international, kind of European-based companies. But that would be something you would certainly go towards. And if you can get a company that is ISO certified, then certainly that's something you would move towards.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
So let's finish up an excellent session, and we need to be back in time to start promptly at 11:25.